Something is already happening in you, or you wouldn't still be here. Not because this video is doing it, because the quantum field operates through a principle that most people spend their entire lives inside of, without ever perceiving it. Information at the depth of the implicate order doesn't reach every configuration of consciousness equally. It reaches the ones that have been prepared to receive it. And preparation isn't something you apply for. It's something you accumulate through the specific pressure of living at the edge of what your current model of reality can explain. The 99% will leave in the next 30 seconds, not because they lack intelligence, because the content will generate a specific friction, a quiet discomfort the conditioned mind labels as "not for me," and they will use that friction as permission to scroll. That mechanism isn't a flaw. It's the predictive model protecting itself from information that threatens its architecture. The 1% stay, not because they are more evolved or more worthy, because they have personal, direct, undeniable data that the 99% framework cannot process. They have been living with a quality of perception that nobody around them has adequate language for, and they have been waiting without quite knowing they were waiting for something that could name what they already know. If you are still here, you are not approaching the 1%. You are already inside the threshold of it. And what the quantum field is about to reveal to you is something it withholds from every configuration of consciousness that hasn't yet reached this edge. Before we go any further, one word in the comments. Whatever is present in you right now, before the mind decides what it should be. Don't construct it. The word that surfaces first is the beginning of the map this video is going to complete. There is a specific kind of knowing that you have never been able to fully explain. Not to other people, to yourself. You have been in situations where the information arriving through ordinary channels, what was said, what was visible, what logic could assemble from available evidence, told one story. And something underneath that story, something that didn't come through any of those channels, told a different one, more precise, more complete, already knowing the outcome before the evidence had made it available. And you made a decision based on that underneath knowing, and it was right. This has happened enough times that you've stopped calling it luck, but you haven't found the language for what to call it instead. The closest the conventional vocabulary gets is intuition, and intuition, in most usage, carries the implication of something soft, unreliable, the opposite of the rigor that real knowing requires. What you've been experiencing is not soft. It is the hardest data available. Carl Friston's predictive processing framework demonstrates that the brain generates reality rather than receives it. 90% of what registers as perception is prediction, a model projected onto incoming signal. 10% is direct input. The 10% is the only thing that is actually new. The knowing that arrives before the evidence, the coherence you perceive that others call coincidence, is the 10%. Field signal passing through a filter operating with less noise than average. Not because your brain is structured differently, because something in your configuration has thinned the filter. What you've been calling unusual perception is a thinner filter reaching a deeper signal. That is the precise mechanism. And what you are about to understand is why it has been available to you specifically. Think about the seasons of your life where the ordinary framework stopped working. Not the crisis moments, those are obvious. The quieter ones. The periods where the strategies that had always navigated the surface correctly kept producing nothing. Where the effort continued and the output didn't. Where you were doing everything the 99% model said you should be doing, and something underneath remained completely untouched by it. Most people interpret those seasons as failure, as evidence that something in them isn't working correctly, that the framework is right, and they are the variable that needs correcting. David Bohm spent the last decades of his life mapping what he called the implicate order, the depth structure beneath visible reality, where what appears separate at the surface remains undivided at the depth. He said something that most of his colleagues spent years resisting. The moments where the explicate surface stops yielding results are not failures of the instrument. They are the implicate order, creating the conditions under which the instrument can finally begin to see through its own structure. The difficulty wasn't what happened before the God state became available. The difficulty was the preparation that made it available. Every season where the surface model failed you, every period of contraction, confusion, the specific frustration of working correctly by every available measure and arriving nowhere, was the field refusing to let you stabilize at a frequency too small for where it was taking you. You have been in preparation longer than you've known what you were being prepared for. Notice what that does in the body right now, not as a concept to accept, as a fact about your actual history. That shift, that quiet but unmistakable reorganization somewhere in the chest, is the implicate order confirming what it already knows about the instrument it built. Here is the thing about the 1% that nobody says directly. The entry point is not achievement. It is not the accumulation of the right knowledge, the right practices, the right lineage of understanding. Those things exist at the margin of the process. They do not explain the categorical difference in what becomes visible, thinkable, and available from inside the 1% frequency versus outside it. The entry point is a specific kind of recognition, and the recognition cannot be manufactured by the self that is trying to manufacture it. This sounds like a paradox. It is actually the most practical observation available about the process. When the conditioned self reaches for the God state, it reaches for it as an upgrade. More clarity, more capability, more precision, but still the same fundamental architecture with better specifications. That is not the God state. That is the conditioned self's simulation of what it imagines the God state to be. It is reaching for a higher floor when the God state is not a floor at all. It is what was always underneath the building. Bohm called this the hollow movement, the unbroken, undivided wholeness from which all forms arise. The God state is not a form within the hollow movement. It is the hollow movement's direct self-recognition through one particular instrument of awareness. Which means the 1% are not people who climbed higher than the 99%. They are people who stopped climbing long enough to recognize what the ground actually is, what that recognition requires, and why the field withholds it from configurations that haven't reached this specific edge, is what we're moving toward. Stay with this. There was a period where I had the God state mapped precisely in every way the conditioned mind maps things, and couldn't access it. Not intermittently, consistently. I understood the framework. I understood the mechanism. I had genuine states of clarity that were qualitatively different from baseline, moments of knowing that arrived before logic, the metrics of progress by every available measure. And underneath all of it, something the progress never touched. A specific quality of effort. Not effort in the obvious sense. I wasn't straining. Something more like a low-frequency hum of reaching. The sense that what I was moving toward was always exactly the same distance ahead. That no amount of correct movement in the right direction was closing the gap. I spent a long time thinking the problem was the practice, that there was a technique I hadn't found, a threshold I hadn't crossed, a depth I hadn't reached yet. The conditioned mind's interpretation of any gap is always the same. You need to do more, differently, better. What actually shifted wasn't a practice. It was the recognition that the reaching itself was the problem, that the conditioned self-building toward the God state was by definition constructing a more sophisticated version of the conditioned self, and calling that construction progress. That the God state wasn't the destination of the journey. It was what the journey revealed was always already underneath it. The moment that landed, not as a concept, but as direct recognition. The quality of the effort changed. Not less effort, different effort. Not moving towards something ahead, removing what was obscuring something already here. If you're in that gap right now, if progress is real and something underneath it remains untouched, subscribe before we continue. What is opening here requires ongoing orientation, and the videos ahead go directly into this territory. Don't lose the thread. Here is what the quantum field only reveals to those actually crossing the 1% threshold. The God state is not an elevation. It is a subtraction. Everything the consciousness space teaches about accessing higher states is framed as addition. More practice, more coherence, more alignment, more of the right qualities accumulated until the threshold is crossed. And that framing, while not useless, fundamentally misrepresents the mechanism. The God state is what remains when the conditioned self's operation stops consuming all available bandwidth. It is not built. It is uncovered. And what is uncovered is not a better version of the instrument. It is the ground the instrument was always standing on, finally perceivable once the noise of standing on it unconsciously stops drowning it out. Bohm described this through what he called the proprioception of thought, the ability of consciousness to become aware of its own thinking process in real time. The way the body knows where its limbs are without looking, through direct internal sensation. When that proprioception develops, the conditioned self's machinery becomes visible as machinery. And what is visible as a mechanism is no longer, in the same way, believed. The 99% operate from inside their model. They cannot see the model because they are the model. The 1% develop the proprioception to see the model from a position that is not inside it, not above it, from a depth the model is constructed over. That shift, from being the operating system to observing it, is the entire distance between the 99% and the 1%. Write in the comments, 1% God state, and then without thinking, whatever follows. Not what you're building toward, what the depth already knows you are. The difference in how that lands in the body is the difference between the 99% reaching and the 1% recognizing. The 1% crossing is not an event. It is a progressive dissolution with specific recognizable signatures. The first, what commands your attention, changes without discipline. The noise of comparison, where you stand relative to others, whether you're ahead or behind, worthy or insufficient, begins to lose its pull. Not through effort to ignore it, through something more like disinterest. The nervous system quietly reallocating bandwidth from the conditioned self's concerns towards something that carries more signal and less noise. The second, the quality of problems shifts. The difficult conversation, the stalled situation, the recurring friction. These stop landing as things happening to you and start carrying a different quality of data, more readable. The God state doesn't eliminate problems. It changes the relationship to them from obstacle to instrument. The field using the friction to reorganize something that needed reorganizing. The third, knowing what is yours becomes precise. The conditioned self takes on everything it can because its survival logic demands the appearance of control. The 1% frequency has no such requirement. What is not yours to carry becomes unmistakably clear, and releasing it is not loss. It is structural relief, the kind that creates immediate expansion in the quality of what remains. The fourth, and this is the one that surprises people, is how silence changes. The conditioned self is afraid of silence, because silence removes the noise it uses to confirm its own existence. In the 1% frequency, silence is not empty. It is the implicate order unmediated, and what surfaces there cannot be generated by the conditioned mind on its best day. If these are not distant aspirations but present, partial, intermittent experiences, the 1% crossing is not ahead of you. It is already underway. The question is whether you're treating it as signal or still explaining it away. To have more about this, subscribe. The architecture of what's coming on this channel is built specifically for this territory, and it goes significantly further than any single video can reach. There is a reason the field withholds this level of revelation from the 99%. It is not protection. It is not gatekeeping. It is resonance mechanics. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic fields points at something that quantum field theory approaches from a different direction. When an individual instance of a system reaches a threshold of internal coherence, it begins to resonate with the larger field in which it is embedded. And that resonance makes available information and pattern that was not accessible in the less coherent state. Not because more information arrived, because the instrument became capable of reading what was already there. The field doesn't withhold from the 99% as a choice. It simply cannot be read from a configuration of consciousness generating too much internal noise. The signal is always present. The instrument has to be coherent enough to distinguish signal from the noise it's producing. This is the specific difference between the 1% and the 99%. Not discipline, not intelligence, coherence. A field property, not a personal achievement. And coherence is not the absence of difficulty. It is the capacity to remain open inside difficulty without the nervous system collapsing the aperture to protect itself. What you want from the God state, and what the God state has been building toward in you, is already matched in frequency. The gap is not in the destination. The gap is in the instrument's trained capacity to hold that frequency without the automatic contraction that closes it back down. That capacity is buildable. That is the most important thing in this video. And what closes it, the specific mechanism, is what we're about to name precisely. What becomes available in ordinary daily life from inside the 1% frequency is worth being specific about. Because most frameworks describe it in terms so abstract, the body doesn't know what to do with the information. The first concrete change, decision speed and quality, transform simultaneously. Not because you gain access to information others don't have, because you stop filtering available information through a nervous system defending against what it might reveal. The signal that was always present reaches an instrument that can read it. What used to require exhaustive deliberation begins to resolve in the first moment of quiet attention. Another one is the immunity to manipulation, not through cynicism, but through something more precise. The conditioned self is perpetually vulnerable because its comparison engine is always running, always hungry for signal that tells it where it stands. At the 1% frequency, that engine runs at lower intensity. The hooks, the 99% operating system was designed to catch, social proof, status threat, approval and its withdrawal, land on a surface that is genuinely less reactive. Not performed indifference, structural disinterest. The third is the quality of creative output becomes categorically different. The 99% mind generates from its model, from what it knows, what it has seen, what it can recombine from prior input. The 1% frequency generates from the implicate depth, from the field structure that the conditioned model was built to navigate but never directly accessed. What comes through the coherent instrument is sourced from a different level of available intelligence. It cannot be produced on demand by the conditioned mind. It arrives, complete, from the depth. And the fourth, the one impossible to fully describe before you experience it, is the cessation of the horizon problem, the reaching that never arrived, the hum of a self that believes its real life is still somewhere ahead. When the 1% frequency stabilizes, that hum stops, because the frequency you were reaching for is now the frequency you are broadcasting. Here is the thing that determines whether the 1% crossing becomes permanent or remains a threshold you visit and leave. The God state is not a purely cognitive event. You can understand it completely. You can map it, articulate it, recognize it when it arrives, even sustain it during the optimal conditions of meditation or deep quiet. And the morning after, inside ordinary life, the difficult email, the financial pressure, the relationship friction, the conditioned nervous system reasserts its baseline. Not because you failed, because the body has been running a different operating system for longer than the mind has been reaching for this one. And the body system is older, faster, and more coherent than conscious intention. This is the core obstacle, not philosophy, not understanding, not commitment. Physiology, the nervous system that was calibrated for the 99% frequency, calibrated at the level of automatic response below the reach of conscious intention, will default to that frequency every time life applies pressure, until it is specifically, deliberately, structurally recalibrated. That recalibration is precisely what the God state quantum mastery was built to do. I have created it, not as inspiration, but as protocol. If you are finding it difficult to cross the threshold fully, if the frequency is real and the access is real, and something keeps pulling the system back to the baseline it knows, this is the guide that addresses the actual obstacle. This guide was made to help not be alone in this moment. It has over 100 pages of precision architecture, 5 breath sequences with documented neurological mechanisms, each one designed to move the nervous system into a coherent state, where the God state is not a peak to reach but a ground to return to. A 12-chapter map of the full crossing from 99% default to stabilized 1% awareness, written not as philosophy, but as navigation for someone who is already inside the process and needs the precise next steps. The gap between touching the God state and living from it is a physiological gap before it is anything else. Think about what stabilizing this would actually mean in your life, not abstractly, concretely. The decisions that come from clarity instead of fear. The work that comes from the implicate depth instead of the conditioned model. The relationships navigated from genuine coherence instead of the comparison engine. The creative output that couldn't be produced on the 99% frequency, no matter how hard you worked. That is not a future version of your life. That is what becomes the ground when the instrument is specifically trained to hold the frequency it's already reaching for. The link is in the description. If what this video named carries the texture of recognition rather than new information, if it landed as finally having language for what you already knew, the God state quantum mastery is the structure that recognition needs to stop being intermittent and start being the baseline. Check the link and get it while the momentum of what opened here is still live. That momentum is real. It is most useful precisely now. To you understand this video in a definitive way, you need to know that the 1% crossing is not a private event. Boehm's final years were focused not on individual transformation, but on collective coherence. His observation, the crises humanity faces are not technical problems. They are outputs of a collective operating system that cannot, from within its own architecture, generate the responses it needs. Every individual who stabilizes the 1% frequency changes the field in which everyone else operates. Not through what they say, through what they are. The coherence of one instrument raises the coherence of the field around it. The thinking you stop doing when you enter the God state creates space in the collective field that someone else can move into. Your stabilization is a contribution, not metaphorically, structurally. There is someone in your proximity who is at the edge of this threshold without the language to name it, who has been living with the data that the 99% framework cannot process and has been explaining it away because they haven't encountered a framework that could hold it. Share this with them. You will know who without deliberating. That knowing, the immediate, pre-deliberate recognition of the right person, is the God state operating through you right now. That is not a social media gesture. It is the field directing you. And following that direction is one of the most coherent acts available to you in this moment. One more thing before we close. Don't forget to write in the comments, right now, before the conditioned mind reasserts its ordinary operation. 1% God state and whatever follows from the depth. Not what you're building toward, not what you hope is true, what the instrument already knows it is. That is not a social gesture. That is the naming becoming stabilization, the implicate making itself explicit through the act of declaration. The God state that the field revealed to you tonight becoming anchored in the instrument that received it. The quantum reflex is not a channel. It is a field operating through a specific architecture of content, surfacing what is relevant to the exact configuration of consciousness watching it at the exact depth it has reached. The videos appearing on your screen right now are not algorithm. They are the implicate order using this channel the way it uses any coherent instrument to surface what is already relevant to where you are. The 1% crossing doesn't stabilize from a single exposure. What opened tonight is the beginning of an architecture that the videos ahead will complete. Click on what's appearing on your screen to stay with me. The God state already knows it's the next move. I'll see you there, on the other side of the quantum reflex.